Dr. Alan Marinis tells a wonderful story that's probably an urban legend, but full of truth nonetheless, concerning famous violinist Itzhak Perlman. As a child, Perlman had been stricken with polio, and so getting on stage is no small feat for him. He wears braces on both legs and walks with 2 crutches. So whenever he plays, Perlman has to labor across the stage slowly until he reaches the chair in which he seats himself to play. As soon as he appeared on stage on this particular night for this particular story, the audience applauded and then waited respectfully as he made his way across the stage to his chair. He took his seat, signaled to the conductor to begin, and began to play. No sooner had he finished the first few bars than one of his strings on the violin snapped with a report like a gunshot. At that point, Perlman was close enough to the beginning of the piece that it would have been reasonable for him to actually stop the concert to a halt while he replaced his string and begin again. But that's not what he did. He waited a moment, and then he signaled to the conductor to pick up exactly where they had left off. Perlman now had only 3 strings on which to play his soloist part. He was able to find some of the missing notes on adjoining strings. But where it wasn't possible, he had to rearrange the music, actually there on the spot in his head, so that it all still held together. He played with passion and artistry, spontaneously rearranging the symphony right down to the end. When he finally rested his bow, the audience sat for a moment in stunned silence. And then they rose to their feet and cheered wildly. They knew that they had been witness to an extraordinary display of human skill and ingenuity. But then Perlman raised his bow to signal for silence. "You know," he said, "it's the artist's task to make beautiful music with what you have." It's the artist's task to make beautiful music with what you have left. Not what we hope to have, not what we expected that we would have, with what we actually have left. With what we've been given, with what actually shows up. Itzhak Perlman knew something about the human spirit, about discipline, persistence, and about gratitude. Now, Perlman contracted polio at the age of 4, a full year after being denied entrance to the Shulamit Conservatory at the age of 3. He was too small to hold the violin. He instead taught himself how to play using a toy fiddle until he was old enough and big enough to reapply and then get in. He fell in love with the violin, hearing a classical piece on the radio in Tel Aviv, and he knew then that he had to learn how to play. So who's to say what's a blessing and what's a curse? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. It's the artist's task to make beautiful music with what you have left. The artist's task. So who's to say? You. And we're all artists in some way. Artists who have the opportunity to piece together from the material of our lives something meaningful. Choosing which moments that we emphasize and which we can leave on the cutting room floor. As human beings, we have the opportunity, the privilege, the responsibility, some might even say the burden, to choose how the pieces of our lives fit together, to decide what will be figural and what will allow to fade into the background. And as it turns out, there's an enormous benefit, both short-term and long, for ourselves and for those around us. There's an enormous benefit even physically and emotionally when we choose to focus our attention on gratitude. Now, if that's true, it seems to me that everyone should be running around saying thank you all the time. but they're not. If it is up to us, then why wouldn't we always choose the positive? Why wouldn't we always choose gratitude? Well, in some sense, it has to do with how we are wired. It has to do with our brains. Neuroscience now tells us that our brains are not the hardwired machines that we once thought they were, that stayed fixed in time after a certain point of maturity into adulthood. But they are still wired in some sense. The new understanding is that our brain can change. Our brain can reorganize, adapt, learn, and reprogram itself into a new wiring. It's called neuroplasticity. And it doesn't matter how old you are, or your previous experience, or even your current challenges. Dr. Rick Hansen, neuropsychologist at UC Berkeley, writes, Buddhism teaches that the mind takes the shape of whatever it rests upon. The mind takes the shape of whatever it rests upon. Or more exactly, the brain takes the shape of whatever the mind rests upon. So if you regularly rest your mind on regrets or resentments, quarrels with others, or self-reproach, you know the voice in the back of your head, maybe you give it too much time, yammering on about how nobody really knows who you are and if they found out. If you rest your mind here, it will change your brain in that particular direction, making it easier to think that again in the future. Because neurons that fire together wire together, for better or for worse. Neurons that fire together wire together. Now, on the other hand, Hansen writes, if you rest your mind on those things that are going well, what you're grateful for, the good connections that we have with others, your good qualities, what you accomplish in a single day, the conditions in the world that are okay, you'll actually build up neural substrates and circuits of positivity in your physical brain. And you'll be more likely to think positive thoughts and positive things and feel gratitude in the future. So our brain and our circuits of gratitude are essentially like a muscle that has to be exercised and flexed and used. And some of us are starting out with weaker gratitude muscles than others. But everyone benefits from daily or weekly use. Our brains are inundated all day long with data. And if we're on autopilot, we allow the loudest, the brightest, the most repetitive stimulus catch our attention and win. In other words, we let the outside world compel our attention depending totally on our circumstances and our environment. We can either do that, or we can make a choice to direct and focus our attention to where we would like it to go. We can notice the loud, bright, or repetitive messages and make a choice about how much space that we want to give them in our heads. But doing so takes practice, so that ideally we can select what it deserves our attention so that we can act instead of react. But choosing what to attend to, what we make figural, is not just simply a matter of shifting focus from the internal world to the external world or vice versa. Our internal world is actually full of a lot of chatter as well. And the brain takes shape of whatever the mind rests upon. And sorting through that internal world in order to focus it can be even more difficult than filtering out our negative external distractions. Dr. Hansen suggests that our nature as animals at the top of the food chain is the product of 3.5 billion years of evolution. In particular, 600 million years of the evolution of the nervous system. So in our history, those ancestors who were really good at resting their attention on something benign for long periods of time were eaten. They were eaten because they weren't nervously scanning the shadows and the slithers and the snarls. So we are essentially the great grandchildren of very nervous and very cranky and very negative folks. So the nature of the brain is to have monkey mind, literally. It's no surprise then that the combination of our biological tendencies and our personal history and our culture has habituated us to an incredibly dense incoming stream of a particular kind of data. Negative, anxious, fearful data. Dr. Hansen writes, in the larger context, it's totally understandable that the untrained mind is continually scanning for either something to want or something to fear. In other words, for a problem to solve. Life, according to our monkey brain, is a problem to be solved and not a gift from God. And so if you're constantly threatened today, it's likely that your brain is preparing you for the wrong kind of threats. We are no longer the hunted. It is instead resilience that we need to persevere in today's challenges and threats on us. What benefits us the most today, even if we're under enormous stress, is resilience and persistence and compassion and empathy. And all of these destinations, these traits in our brain, are built up from the practice of gratitude. If we don't have control over the spotlight of what we pay attention to, if our minds are what they call stimulus bound in cognitive psychology, if they're constantly reacting to the outside world, then we have no control over our mind. And we pretty much have no impact on how our brain changes over time, when we could be shaping it to be more resilient and even happier in the future. So therein lies the reasoning for practicing some kind of directed attention, a discipline of sorts on the brain, maybe playing an instrument, or meditating, or focusing our attention on something regular every single day, and ideally something that benefits us. Church is where we cultivate gratitude, and gratitude is good for our health. And so, therefore, my friends, by some deductive reasoning, church is good for your health. Dr. Robert Emmons from UC Davis has actually discovered that we can directly affect our capacity for resilience, as well as positively affect our emotional and physical health by simply turning our attention to gratitude. According to Dr. Emmons' research, the practice of gratitude can increase the experience of happiness by about 25%. The most common method that they use in their research is to ask people to keep a gratitude journal. People were invited to write down something that they feel grateful for 4 times a week, so not even every day, 4 times a week. And in as little as 3 weeks, it was often enough to create a meaningful difference in one's happiness and create an effect that can last up to 6 months. 6 months. Another exercise that Dr. Emmons suggests is to write a gratitude letter to a person who's exerted a positive influence on your life, but who you haven't properly thanked in the past. And ideally, and when it's possible, to meet that person and read the letter to them face to face. Gratitude, it seems, is actually contagious. Dr. Emmons' research shows an increase in reported connectedness to other people. When we're practicing gratitude, studies show that we're more likely to also help someone else in need who has a personal problem, which in turn gives them something to be grateful about. So in essence, it really is contagious. Now there are some side effects. There are some side effects of choosing to focus our attention regularly on gratitude that I need to warn you about. Dr. Emmons' research has shown side effects of regular gratitude practice include increased hours and quality of sleep, more optimistic expectations for the coming week, lowered blood pressure, and fewer reported physical symptoms such as pain. And there even seems to be a correlation between those who practice gratitude and an increased time spent exercising. So maybe you could use gratitude as your new weight loss plan in 2013. It would be easy, though, To explain away Itzhak Perlman's experience of making it through an entire symphony with only 3 strings to his creative genius. Perlman did draw from a deep well that day, a well of discipline and skill, but he also did not let himself be flustered in the moment by this setback. He chose instead to see his circumstance as an opportunity, to stretch himself, to reach even deeper than he had before, so that instead of being disappointed and paralyzed, he actually had an experience of increased creativity and innovation. Perlman was drawing on resilience, and resilience is built from gratitude, one day at a time. Now, there are many strategies to help anyone cultivate a more grateful approach to life, but Dr. Emmons warns us that these exercises are not for what he calls the intellectually lethargic. How's that for a term? It's a euphemism for dodo brains, I guess, or I don't know, lazy maybe. The intellectually lethargic, he says. In his most recent book, he stresses that gratitude is actually incompatible with feelings of victimhood or entitlement. Gratitude is incompatible with feelings of victimhood or entitlement. It's also incompatible with the inability to recognize someone's shortcomings or to admit that one is not self-sufficient. So it seems that gratitude and entitlement cannot coexist. Gratitude and perfectionism cannot coexist. So a sense of entitlement or deservingness blocks the recognition that other people or fortunate circumstances are partly responsible for the good things that happen to us. When we believe that we are entirely in control of our lives, when we take the credit for the good things that happen to us, it's difficult to feel a sense of indebtedness or a sense of gratefulness in life. And so when something out of control happens, there's no reserve from which we can draw. Dr. Emmons believes that far from being a warm, fuzzy sentiment, he writes, real gratitude is morally and intellectually demanding. It requires contemplation, reflection, and discipline, and can be difficult and painful work. To seek the good in each day, in each moment, requires you to choose gratitude over and over again with contemplation and reflection and discipline. And if you do, you can not only increase your happiness, but also create a storehouse of resilience that is available when times really get tough. Now, there are also studies on the spiritual and religious connection to gratitude. Gratitude is ultimately the affirmation of a bond between the giver and receiver and is central to the human-divine relationship. As long as people have believed in God, believers have sought ways to express gratitude and thanksgiving to this God who's considered to be the ultimate giver. Gratitude is thus a universal religious sentiment, evident in the offerings described in ancient scriptures to contemporary praise and worship music. So in fact, prayers of thankfulness are one example of directing our attention to gratitude. So gratitude is a choice. It doesn't depend on circumstances or genetic wiring or something that we have no control over. Something I feel that's related. The Buddha said, suffering is wanting things to be different than they actually are. And it's the artist's task to make beautiful music with what you have left. Gratitude makes life better for ourselves and for other people. So when things go well, it enables us to savor that things are going well. And when things go poorly, gratitude enables us to handle those situations better with resilience and creativity, compassion, connection, and empathy. And when negative situations are long-term, gratitude allows us the storehouse from which to gather clarity to make the next best right choice for us, despite that setback. Now, in Emmons' research, he created a gratitude quotient, kind of like an IQ or an EQ. He calls it a GQ. So I want to leave you with this story from a 66-year-old woman who was interviewed for his study, who has an extremely high GQ. She says, our family was on vacation in Miami, Florida, and my brother and I had been playing in the waves along the beach when I became very chilled and was shivering. My parents took me back to the hotel, and there I became very sick with a high fever of almost 107 degrees. I barely remember my father carrying me in his arms, wrapped up in a blanket, through the hotel lobby to a car. By the time we reached the hospital, I was unconscious. The doctors told my parents that I would not live, and that they should prepare themselves for my death. For several days and nights, everyone expected me to die. Suddenly, and for no reason we understand, my fever broke. My mother said that the bobby pins in my hair were pasted down from the sweat when my fever broke. I clearly remember Mother telling me this, and I also remember more than anything the gratitude on her face and in her voice that I had lived. The experience of listening to her, of feeling her gratitude, made a profound impression on me. I think this is why I have always felt that life is a gift and that my life is from God. Most people do not realize that life is a gift until much later in life. I feel that I'm very fortunate to have known, even as a child, that life indeed is a gift to be cherished. So that is another gift, to have this awareness of life being a gift. Knowing that I almost died and was expected to die has made me exceedingly grateful to be alive. And I thank God for this gift every day of my life. And I like to share my experience with others in the hope that they too might become aware of how precious this gift of life really is, and that they might know it even sooner than I did. Gratitude is contagious. Choose gratitude. Amen.